Time frame 287 to 347. Pachomius is born in Upper Egypt into a pagan family. Because of the strange nature of Egyptian life, Upper Egypt actually means south. Southern Egypt is Upper Egypt, Northern Egypt is Lower Egypt. So Pachomius is born and raised in the south. He gets, at about the age of 20 or so, the army comes through and says, okay, we need so many young men from this town to come join up. And somehow Pachomius gets sent off with them. What happens is, when they get to where the military base is at that town, the local Christian church there at Thebes has kind of a mission set up to take care of these young men who have just been drafted. And so they're providing these young men with food and clothes and, making sure that the discipline doesn't get to be too burdensome for them. And Pachomius is completely moved that these people who don't know him or know any of these other men would go out of their way, take their time, and take their own funds to support them. He's moved by this, and he remembers this throughout his military service. When he's done, he settles in a Christian town and eventually gets baptized. I always want to aim it at the wall. The wall won't do a darn thing if I point this thing at. Again, Pachomius feels this call to a monastic life, goes out into the desert, and for 7 years lives with an older, experienced monk, learning how to do this, and then sets off on his own. As you might expect, this is an extremely difficult life. Not only are you trying to live by yourself, but you're living by yourself in a terrible environment. You can't just put a garden in, get a few chickens, and have everything you need. You're in the desert. It's a very tough life. And Pachomius comes up with an interesting idea. Rather than, and it can take years and years and years for new monks to gain enough experience to go out on their own. So Pachomius comes up with an interesting idea. He decides, instead of a whole bunch of hermits out in the desert living by themselves, why don't we build a place that all of the monks could live? It's the very first monastery. He calls it a cenobium, which means there's a common life, that the monks, they will take their time to go off by themselves and pray, but for everything else they'll come together and work as a team. So this is about the year 320 AD. You know those prayer ropes we use for the Jesus prayer? It was invented by him. Pachomius has, he's the first one to come up with this idea. It's brand new, and there are problems early on. And the rule he sets out is pretty harsh, and he emphasizes discipline. He's going to emphasize obedience to the superior. Again, when people are going off into the desert to live by themselves, there's no superior. It's each monk by him or herself. Well, now somebody's got to be in charge. If we're going to live in this one place, somebody's got to, say yes, and someone's got to say no. So he's going to emphasize obedience to the superior and lives of mutual service. In a sense, he models this monastery on the early part of the book of Acts, where it talks about how the church in Jerusalem lived and how everything was shared in common. Everybody put their money into a common fund, and we took care of everyone's needs. This is what Pachomius tries to do. He eventually does it very well. By the time he dies, he's in charge of over 11, well, he's in charge of 11 monastic houses with 7,000 monks and nuns. As I said, there's an explosion of folks running out there to live this life. That's a lot. Pachomius dies in an epidemic. And I think that brings us to John Cassian. And the name of that projector not available. John Cassian lives about 2 generations further down, 350 to 435. Right around the time Anthony and Pachomius are dying, John is being born. John is from what we would now call Romania. And eventually he too feels this call to monastic life, and he goes off into the deserts of Palestine to become a monk. John decides he wants to see how the life is being lived. What do other monasteries look like? What are other folks doing? And so he starts to move from this monastery to that monastery, from here to there. He becomes a wandering monk. He eventually he travels through Egypt, and its monasteries begin in about 385. He arrives in Constantinople in 400 and becomes a disciple of John Chrysostom. So again, all of these folks are interwoven here. Athanasius and Anthony, John Chrysostom and John Cassian. These folks didn't live in a vacuum. While he's in Constantinople, he's ordained deacon, and eventually he's going to go to Rome to try to get some help for John Chrysostom. Remember, I mentioned last week John Chrysostom had been exiled. John Cassian goes to Rome to try to get help for him. While he's in Rome, he's ordained a priest. Did I have that there? Yeah. Oh, okay, good. Ordained, okay. Eventually, he's going to travel to what we would now call France, or France, where he's going to start to found monasteries for both women and men based on what he saw in Egypt. So now we have this Eastern idea of monasticism coming west. Cassian is the important bridge. St. Benedict, coming not too long after this, is going to base his famous rule on what he reads that John Cassian wrote. And the rule of St. Benedict, of course, still exists to this very day. There are still Benedictine monasteries. Trappists are basically very strict Benedictines. So this connection here of east to west lives on. John is going to write two works that we still have: the Synodic Institutions and something called the Conferences. As I said, he's kind of the exception. Most of the Desert Fathers didn't leave us texts that they wrote. We have collections of what they said, we have collections of what they did, but not actual things they themselves wrote. So here are some quotes from John Cassian. We are often indifferent to our brethren who are distressed or upset on the grounds that they are in this state through no fault of ours. The doctor of souls, however, wishing to root out the soul's excuses from the heart, tells us to leave our gift and be reconciled, not only if we happen to be upset by our brother, but also if he is upset by us, whether justly or unjust. Only when we have healed the breach through our apology should we offer our gift. He's building here on writings of St. Paul, who's going to say, who has already by this time said something very, very similar. However, of this much we must be sure, never by our sole diligence or zeal, nor by our most tireless efforts, can we reach perfection. Human zeal is not enough to win the sublime rewards of blessedness. The Lord must be there to help us and to guide our hearts toward what is good. Every moment we must join in the prayer of David. Direct my footsteps along your paths so that my feet do not move astray. And he has settled my feet on a rock and guided my footsteps. All this so that the invisible guide of the human spirit may direct back towards love of virtue our free will, which in its ignorance of the good and its obsession with passion is carried headlong into sin. Or, no structure of virtue can possibly be raised in our soul unless first the foundations of true humility are laid in our heart. Indeed, in everything it can be shown that men always have need of God's help, and that human weakness cannot accomplish anything that has to do with salvation by itself alone. That is, without the aid of God. And all these matters, as we cannot just desire them continuously without the divine inspiration, so in no respect whatever can we perform them without his help.